Oh no, yeah, sorry, Anita is. Sorry.
Can you do it? She'll probably need the.
Ladies and gentlemen, take a seat. I'm sure some more people will join us from the coffee break. Feel free to come closer. Human rights defenders are supposed not to be shy, so come closer. This is a deep dive session. We really want to make this participatory. I will be giving the floor to as many people as possible. We're only giving 1 hour, but we'll try to use that 1 hour effectively. I should introduce myself. My name is Livio Sarandrea. I am leading the UNDP work on business and human rights in the region, and I'm very honored to be moderating the panel on human rights defenders and responsible business. It's a subject which is very, very dear to me, since I started my work in human rights actually as an activist in 1996 in post-war Bosnia, and I defending land rights and property rights at that time, not with UN, but I did had my own share of intimidation and threats. So this is an issue which is very, very dear to me. And indeed, threats to human rights defenders and to civic freedoms are increasing. There's increasing concern globally. And there's an increasing number of human rights defenders that are under threat and attack, also because they raise concern about adverse human rights impacts on business operations. I mentioned that I started my work in 1996. In 1998, as most of you probably know, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution on human rights defenders, and the UN has celebrated last year the 20 years anniversary of that, and came up with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights presented some numbers. So 20 years later, they calculated that 3,500 killings of human rights defenders happened since 1998. Those same numbers talk about 281 killings in 2016, 312 in 2017, and 321 in 2018. So the number is unfortunately rising. The Human Rights Council reports also on increasing gender-specific risks, which is an element that we would like to introduce in our discussion today. They talks about public shaming of women, attacks on reputation, sexual violence, and so on. Killing, we started with the killing, which is obviously the tip of the iceberg, and indeed the most extreme scenarios, but the numbers that we are talking about will be much, much larger if we consider attacks as firing of activists, suing of activists for defamation cases, famous slap cases, or attacks by security firms hired by companies, intimidation of activists, and indeed also the denigrating of activists for being so-called anti-development. There is a study that was very recently released by OECD Watch and the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. I think it was referenced already a number of times today. It was published, I believe, 3 days ago. I'm glad to see it became very popular. I do encourage those that haven't read it to read it, which it's on the case. It's an analysis of the cases of reprisals submitted to the NCC. And that report tells us, gives us a very interesting picture. It tells us, for example, that most of those reprisals happen in cases of large development projects. In many cases of, in the instances of agribusiness work, and indeed, as we have seen in this region recently, a lot in connection to labor rights issues. The same report tells us that 55% of the victims are community leaders or members of indigenous groups. Perhaps that's not surprising. 23% are workers and unionists. 30% are members of human rights groups. There's a remaining 9% which are regrouped in the study as others, which allow us to also make the point, which another point that I want to introduce in the discussion, that human rights defenders are indeed, for the largest part, community leaders, CSOs, NGOs, but human rights defenders are, can be, should be also government officials, NHRIs, NCPs, UN officials, and indeed business people. The last point that I will make is on the geographical relevance of the attacks to human rights defenders. I think Dante Pesce, I don't know if he's around, mentioned in a previous panel that Latin America is leading on this, sadly. Indeed, I believe the first 9 countries where human rights defenders are most at risk are in Latin America, but the 9th or the 10th country is actually in this region. I will let you guess that. If you don't, I will give you the answer at the end. So we wanted to acknowledge at the beginning, at the outset, the very difficult situation in which human rights defenders found themselves globally and certainly in this region. We have around 1 hour, maybe a little less, it was allocated to us to indeed look at the challenges, but also very much look at solutions and actions. How can governments and indeed companies, which are also represented in this panel, play a role in supporting and protecting human rights defenders? Or if you like, how can human rights defender be what has been called a critical friend, a partner for business, helping to identify and address human rights risks, perhaps through what was discussed today in a breakfast session, alternate human rights due diligence, or alternate or shade of human rights impact assessment, and also be that watchdog, perhaps, of the level playing field, and help companies in remediate abuses when they do occur. So we have a lot to discuss, and again, I do want to involve as many participants as possible, but to kick off the discussion, I have a very strong panel of 3 distinguished human rights defenders themselves, and certainly people that can speak on this subject. I hope that they will help us in collecting action points along, of course, with aligning challenges. I'd like to start with, on my left side, Ms. Pranom Somwong of Protection International, also known as Kun B. And Kun B has been very active, not only in protecting and promoting rights, but also being very outspoken about the rights of the human rights defenders, and more specifically, women human rights defenders. So I would like to highlight the importance of women human rights defenders and their role in being more able to highlight the specific negative impacts that business operations have on women, along with the specific challenges that human rights defenders face. So the floor is yours, Kunbi.
Thank you very much, Livio. I like to have the pictures of the women human rights defender, which is, I'm not going through the slide with PowerPoint. I think we have a lot of points and hopefully it's powerful. But the photo with the PowerPoint is the photo of the women who have been defending human rights every day, 100 years, 1,000 years ago, and continuing, mostly a land rights defender, women, and environmental justice. I work with women human rights defender, I mean both men and women, and then various grassroots activisms, community-based, rural-based women. People say who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who are doing it. Human rights defenders are not the crazy ones. They are the ones who believing strongly in our fundamental rights, and they're defending it. Human rights defenders serve and pursue the interests of the rights holder, victims of violation, and society as a whole. In the UN Declaration on Human Rights, which is 21 years right now, is every one of us obligation to defending human rights. And somehow, not that everyone are defending human rights, Somehow they are groups of the person who are, is no choice, but because they have to defend their livelihood, their life and quality of life and their dignity, so they are advanced to protect and defending those human rights. One consequences of criminalizing, delegitimizing and creating repressive environment for human rights work is that decent and democratic participation become increasingly dangerous and existential threat for both human rights defender and their community. We know that, we hear that from many reports. And one report will be launching as this afternoon on uncalculated risk faced by human rights defender at the tea break in the afternoon. We know that, but make no mistake from that situation as well. The other consequences is that women leaders around the world rise to this challenge and bring their family and a community with them. So we also seeing the trend of rising of the women rising up to protecting their livelihood, their land, environment, and the other human rights issues. People love statistics. One of the report launched by the Civicus in 2015 saying sometimes companies are complicit in repression of human rights. Since 2015, there have been close to 1,400 record attacks against citizens and organizations working on human rights issues related to business. When you are plus with the documentation with protecting the national recording, only in Thailand, we record at least 150 incident attack human rights defender in Thailand each year. So if you come up with all of that numbers, it's more than 2,500 attacks against an ordinary people who defending human rights, and most of them are related to business and corporations harmful practice. Power and gender covenant to put women activists at extreme risk. Violence as a threat of violence maintain otherwise unstable social order. Protecting the privilege and the control of resources and materials are the symbolics of empower, balance, inequality of the world we're facing right now. And we know that women are most affected by the political, economic, environmental, and health crises across the world on the front line. They are the ones who also make change to coping those consequences. Why women rarely have a seat in decision-making table? They also organizing their community, developing solution and promotion of the justice, often as a great risk of go against and have a loss to pay. I like to put up some of the consequences, but also the gaps, the challenges facing by the grassroots women. First of all is the combination of domestic responsibility at home. The role of the woman as a caregiving and activism create a high level of exhaustion that impairs women's health and hidden their political participation. Last week, we organized a Women Manifesto workshop with around 50 women, grassroots women human rights defenders around Thailand. We found out that mostly of the women we work for, they have to work at least 16 hours a day without pay. The only payment they have might be very little. So we're talking about women who defending human rights, very important issues, working for 16 hours a day, get a very little pay. Day payment or their monthly income might be less than 300 USD a day. No, a month, sorry. If they can earn that a day, it will be good. But they are earned very low. They're doing a lot of the care work. And then what else are we expecting women to be when they are defending human rights as a leadership position? So when we are talking about human rights due diligence, I think it's a great idea, but it's also it's going back to the burden of proof. Who is holding the burden of proof here? When they're facing judicial harassment, when they're trying to holding company but also authority accountable. And again, we're talking about the other system when the committee or women have to go through and look at that. When you have to work 16 hours a day without any pay that much, how this burden of proof can be solved? The lack of the recognition of their leadership undermine a women activist self-perception and confidence, and reduce the likelihood that she will receive adequate and appropriate support from different stakeholders. The issue of impunity, it has been addressed time to time of this conference. We also seeing the trend of the normalization of violence. may decrease women's capacity to acknowledge and be aware of her risk and vulnerability. So these issues it actually has been addressed by different groups who work with women human rights defenders at the community level and grassroots level. We do hope you also look at these issues as a political issues, as a critical issue we have to address right now. We also joined the global call by civil society calling for the leadership to support the binding treaty process as a concrete positive step to ensure the corporate and business accountability on human rights, but also it's a way to protect the women human rights defender. I like to say something about in the morning it's very encouraging to listen to the UN working group in the breakfast section, and I think we all talking a lot about capacity building to human rights defender. I like to say that actually having every day committee or women human rights defender are actually doing a lot of capacity realization. We do already put together as a movement building to strengthening organization, including enhance our ability to conduct detailed risk and the power analysis, and to develop protection and communication network which can prevent, merely react to the threat and attack. A lot of work has been putting in preventive level and is very much in the community protection network. We are calling for you to recognize that is the best mechanism to do the risk assessment by the women and men who themselves are facing risk. It's the best mechanism. And when they do the risk assessment, they're mapping the power actor, which is can be threat, but can also be protected. And when they demand for protection, what you have to do is do that demand into the reality. So that will be helping a lot in terms of building the capacity on those threats, the violation against human rights defender. But also I think very important is we see as a lack of urgent mobilization to support in regional but also international level to the women human rights defenders who are at risk. We're talking about access to justice. I think we're talking in previous section about the judicial process, which is sadly in reality when women has been facing judicial harassment and also facing the court case, their lack of the real understanding about responsibility by stakeholder and the business and the state at the judicial system. We hear those example yesterday when women land rights defender has been convicted by the court. At the beginning, the court ordered her to pay for the global warming for 200,000 baht. Yesterday, the public prosecutor in Thailand increased the demand to ask the women to pay another 200,000 baht. So end up paying 500,000 baht when she's owned just the 3 acres of the land and doing agriculture work. So I guess this is a huge crisis, looking at how the judicial process are linking to the issue of protection of human rights defenders when women are facing the judicial harassment. I do hope we have the second round because I do have more recommendations. And I think one of the issues we like to call for attention is it's far too long we had political conversation without the real representation of the people who most affected, and mostly are women as well. We do hear a lot of all of us are middle class and the wealthy, and most of us also enjoying the forum in some of the powerful aspects of being a wealthy corporation. But we are imagine that if we would like to have more representation of the community, we do hope the next forum will be representing at least half of the participants are the people who truly affected on the business and corporation. We also looking at those issues as systematic issues must be addressed. We're calling for political leadership, and for us, women human rights defenders at the grassroots level are political leadership. People keep asking about practical way to work. We like to share some of our methodologies. To defend human rights is very difficult when the public are not understanding the right to defend human rights. We do work with the public in Thailand as well, and sometimes at the regional level. We do the photo exhibition. For those who die trying, some of you might know them. It's a photo exhibition of human rights defenders who were killed or enforced disappearance. Photo being placed where exactly they were killed. This exhibition go around Thailand. We having around at least 20,000 local who come to talk to us and express their concern, but also solidarity to the human rights defender. We have a big thanks to SIDA who support this project, but also the Canadian Embassy. From that photo exhibition, we work with the Canadian composer who producing the one album dedicated to Thai human rights defender. We call musical DNA. So this classical music album is also going around the world right now and address awareness about Thai human rights defender. Talking about women who are still standing, who do a lot of preventive strategy to not be die or enforce disappearance. They are still standing. We're producing the Women Human Rights Defender Diary last year. 20 women in Thailand who stand very strong to defend human rights. So this is a public tools. Recently, we do the quilting. We work with women human rights defenders to make the quilt. This is a bag, which is copied from the quilt of women. It's a way of expressing and kind of helping women to tell their story as well. So political leadership is required of space, but I think it's required women human rights defenders themselves to be here to tell you their story and to tell you from their experiences what they would like to be so at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kumbi. Very, very inspiring as usual, very practical. Thank you for spending some time on the challenges, but thank you for spending at least equal time on solutions, on actions. I've noted many, let me just highlight, need for a balancing of power, risk assessment from rights holders themselves. Indeed, half of the participants from rights holders, access to justice. Give me just 30 seconds to reaffirm what the ambassador said already yesterday. In the framework of the cooperation between the UND project and the government of Sweden, we will be providing some small grants to actors that can support access to justice for human rights defenders. There is a call for application which is still on for at least one more week. Do approach me, 2 more weeks, do approach me, Victoria. I hope the relevant actors that can support access to justice for human rights defenders do approach us on that. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to the second panelist, who is Professor Anita Ramus. She doesn't need a lot of introduction first because she's well known to most of you, but because she has also spoke before. I remind you that she's a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. But within the Working Group on Business and Human Rights, she's the focal point for human rights defenders. And the working group decided, I believe 2 years ago, to give focused attention to the issue of human rights defenders and civil space, and come up with a report that the working group presents regularly to the Human Rights Council or to the General Assembly. So a guidance for state and businesses on action to safeguard and support human rights defenders. I know that at least one consultation has also already taken place, Anita. So why don't you give us a little bit of the scoop in advance? The guidance I understood is almost ready. Give us some initial idea of the recommendations that will be there, and also perhaps talk a little bit about what came out of the consultation, which are specifically focused on human rights defenders.
Thank you so much, Livio, and I'll be very brief and just to say, why did the working group take this on, and why am I the focal point? As a lawyer and law professor, I represent defenders who have been incarcerated, mainly in the Latin American and the Americas, but again, as a working group, we engage in country visits and country missions and engage with states. We also receive communications from civil society where there have been issues and human rights abuses that relate to corporations. And in everywhere we go, whether it is here in Thailand or whether it is Peru or Kenya or Canada or the United States, the issue of risks to defenders has come up everywhere. So it's a global and a universal challenge. And when we see those themes and those challenges as a global one, it's an issue that we can't ignore. And again, in terms of communications, you heard the statistics from Kunbi and Livio. As the numbers rise, the level of complaints that we get are rising as well. So we can't ignore it, and so the question is, what can we do? I'll just say that we have consulted widely, regionally, and with defenders, companies, and governments. And from that, we're coming out with just a very simple framework, taking the guiding principles and saying, what do the expectations are for states, for companies, and on access to remedy, when we think specifically about the challenges and the risks to human rights defenders as a community. And so I will just highlight here, because you'll hear from Shubha, I think, from the corporate perspective, what are some things we've learned about what states could be doing better. Now, many states, including states from where large multinational companies are headquartered, have human rights defender policies as part of their own kind of foreign policy. But what we found is that the issue of human rights defenders themselves don't really address the issue of businesses and the relationship between businesses, as Kunbi mentioned, to the harms, right? The complicity or the contribution to human rights abuses and to defenders. So what have we learned? The first is national action plans, right? That at a very starting point, that governments need to think about this issue and think about the role that companies can play and the harm that companies can pose. The National Action Plan is a place to do that. The second is, if a government has a defender's guidance, or if they don't, in either place, they need to develop guidance and protocols for what the expectations are for companies when they are operating, either locally or when they go abroad, in terms of human rights defenders. We're very pleased that Canada was one of the first governments to do this. They have a program called Voices at Risk. They have expanded their guidance for companies and have set forth an expectation that if Canadian companies wish to receive support from the Canadian government, they need to respect the rights of defenders. And if there's a problem, for example, not participating in an NCP proceeding or being linked very specifically to abuses and, of defenders' rights, then they may lose their support from the Canadian government in terms of trade incentives. Another area is export credit and finance. Companies receive many benefits from their governments, and often in the context of development, we see, of course, that companies may be linked to human rights risks to defenders in the development context. The Dutch Export Credit Agency has developed an early warning mechanism. They only did this because, many of you may be familiar with this, because a Honduran human rights defender, Berta Caceres, was murdered in relation to her standing up for communities with respect to a development project. And so the Export Credit Agency went back and said, what could we do better, right? So the idea is that they can look at these issues and be an early warning mechanism and take steps. Embassies have a role to play in terms of supporting companies, but supporting defenders, and then just coordination and protocols. So there are many things I think that the state can do, and I'll just stop and say two more things about practical steps, which is access to remedy. Now, companies can do, I think, a better job on access to remedy when it comes to risks to defenders specifically, not just general grievance. But I would say on remedy that you've heard from Kunbi about the challenges, right? The use of the legal system to silence defenders is, again, a global issue. So what are the solutions? One is that the judiciary is critical to this. So we need to reform laws, but we also need to educate the judiciary. And the judges who have been champions need to be the ones leading and encouraging their peers to be equally brave in dealing with these issues. Similarly, lawyers, right? So that we need more lawyers who are representing defenders and who are well able to deal with this. And then developing a community of practice around these challenges. So legal reform, we need laws changed, we need judges educated, and we need lawyers able to support. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. I was hoping to collect 10 points at the end of the session. I think I've already collected 7 or 9, so probably that list will be longer. So thank you, Anita, again, and thank you for hinting at the beginning to the role of companies as well. And we're very happy to have a representative from the business sector here with us. And a number of companies have indeed started to put human rights defenders specifically in focus and developed either specific policies or within their human rights policies have given emphasis to human rights defenders. And Coca-Cola is one of those. And we have today with us the Coca-Cola Director for Human Rights for Eurasia and North Africa, Shubha Sekar. So Shubha, the Coca-Cola latest human rights report, you have a specific human rights report. In fact, perhaps you should signal that. Not only a sustainability report, but you have your own specific human rights report where you in fact highlight 13 salient human rights issues, includes safety and health, equality, child labor, forced labor, land rights. but you also present some lessons learned and some priority areas of focus for Coca-Cola. Human rights defender is one of those, and that is honestly what triggered my attention and the reason why I reached out to you and asked you to be in this panel, and I thank you for accepting that. So, Shubha, what can companies do to prevent threats and intimidation, and also provide remedies when threats do take place? And how can companies benefit from the critical friends, as I called them earlier, from those who are in direct contact with the issue? As Kumbi was saying before, nobody knows better than the human rights defenders what are the risks for the people and for the companies as well. They are the first responders. So I would like you to tell us a little bit about it. Yeah, thank you, Shubha.
Thank you, Livio, for the introduction. First of all, I just want to make a comment that I'm delighted to be part of a 3-woman panel, and that shows a lot about the positive role women can play in the human rights space. Before I go on to the 2 questions that Livio has posed, I just want to give a little bit of background on our human rights framework. So we as a company have been steadfast in our commitment to human rights. We have policies specifically addressing human rights and procedures which are aligned to the UN guiding principles, and we've also, as Livio said, put out a human rights report, standalone report, as opposed to our sustainability and CSR reports, where we have the salient human rights risk mapped out after a very in-depth consultation, which we worked with Shift, and over 180 people from all sectors and all stakeholders were consulted, and then we have that where we focus on these areas, and we also have a due diligence approach. Apart from that, we have a specific department, human rights department, which works on human rights, and we believe that this requires a very special kind of focus, which is not to be mixed with others. So other areas are also equally important. Apart from that, as the expectation of our stakeholders have been evolving, and the space, as you all know, has been fast evolving, so has our approach to human rights as we listen, learn, and we act. So that's a little bit of the background. When coming to the specific area of what can companies do to prevent threats and provide remedy, I'd like to very clearly state that the human rights protectors play a very critical role in campaigning for societies that are based on transparency, on being inclusive, and to establish rule of law, which is equally important for business. And therefore, as very interesting point that now one reads, and which I totally agree with, is that there is a shared space where there is interest for both human rights defenders and business to protect and widen it. Having said that, just want to reiterate that the expectation is very clearly laid out that business needs to respect the role of human rights defenders. And therefore, it's important for business to have clear human rights policies which are aligned to internationally laid out policies and protocol, the UN guiding principles. Now we have the declaration on the human rights of defenders, and all of this very, very clearly laid out, and companies need to very much align to that and be responsible and accountable for their actions. Apart from that, as far as our company is concerned, as I explained, human rights is extremely important for us and for our leadership. We do not interfere with the lawful activities of human rights defenders. Very, very clearly, our recent updations to our human rights policies clearly lay down that we need to engage with communities on human rights matters that are of interest to them. And typically, these human rights issues and matters which are of interest to the communities are articulated or advanced by human rights defenders. These could be individuals, they could be NGOs, they could be trade unions, and we very clearly laid out that that's our way of operating, and we engage with our communities extensively. We have a huge presence, and our local business units do engage, and of course, as human rights team, we also come in where there are big issues. And so it's extremely important to have that approach where we are engaging and we are understanding issues, we are learning, and we are respecting. As far as the response to issues concerning human rights defenders is concerned, this would depend on facts of each case and the leverage that one can bring. So where our response, for example, would range from direct use of direct leverage, where there is that leverage where we can bring remediation, or where we kind of build leverage along with others. Typically, issues are complex, and one company cannot do, everything. So what we do there is work with other companies, other organizations to build that leverage, and we also reserve the right to speak out individually or along with others, where we feel the rights of human rights of the HRDs, the human rights defenders with whom we engage is impinged. In the second part of the area that Livio wanted me to focus on is that what are the benefits that corporates can have by directly engaging, and I think there is huge benefit. These the human rights defenders will be able to give information on the risks and whether there is a impingement of some rights in advance, and companies can proactively work and address it before it escalates and becomes a reputational issue. Also what happens is that while companies have a responsibility for their supply chains, but the fact remains that supply chains are extremely complex. There is no, even yesterday's session, there is no magic wand that you can. There are complex issues. The complexity comes because of the size of the supply chain, the visibility, the fact that supply chain constituents could be in jurisdictions where there are not proper enforcement of laws. It could be in jurisdictions where there are inherent risks. There could be subcontracting. At times, the corporates don't even know, and it's been subcontracted. And there are times, where we get to know, okay, it has been subcontracted, and there's certain risks which has come. And therefore, as the constituent of the supply chain goes further and further away in terms of the layers and the tiers, the extent of control and the governance that a business can have becomes less and less. And that's where the role of the human rights defenders come in, where in deep supply chain issues, if they bring it to the notice of the brand, it can be proactively addressed. Apart from that, as I also touched upon earlier, it's important to engage with the stakeholders, and this could include civil society organizations, human rights defenders. There are, at times, like for example, us, we engage with trade unions, for example, like the IUF. We have biannual consultations. We engage on a continual basis with NGOs, and that has really helped us over a period to get to know issues, over time, and be able to remediate it at the most local level, and that's where actually the remedy lies. Apart from that, there are also complexities in remediation. So the human rights defenders are experts, with the understanding of the grassroots. They understand the social, economic, political, cultural sensitivities, and they can help the brand in bringing about sustainable solutions if they come in. Now, big MNCs and big corporations have the benefit of experts, both within the company, and they can reach out to experts outside, understanding the complexities of human rights issues. But smaller companies do not have the benefit, and there again, the human rights defenders can play a constructive and a very critical role in helping with the remediations and finding sustainable solutions. So here again, I would like to reiterate a common thread that has come out in most of the panels is that no individual company, no individual organization can solve all these complex issues on their own. There's clearly a need for comprehensive solutions, and that can happen where there is multiple stakeholders, including the human rights defenders, who come and play a collaborative, constructive role on the way forward. And it's important that all of them work. It's hard work. Again, there is no quick fix, easy solutions, but work to create long-term relationships and trusted relationships, which are extremely important in this space.
Thank you very, very much, Shubha. Very clearly articulated, and if I may say, strong messages. They were really happy to register coming from the business sector. I'll just highlight one that struck me the most, which is role of human rights defenders helping in managing the access to information through a complex supply chain. This is something we hear over and over and over from big companies. How do we get to the bottom of our supply chains? I very much appreciate you pointing at the human rights defenders helping in managing the challenge that does exist through the life. But those who contact with the problems, the human rights defenders, can help companies in managing that. So I like to commend this wonderful womanel, or womenel, if I can call it that way. They were incredibly practical and disciplined also in keeping time, which leaves us with 15 minutes, maybe 20. I will waive my right of doing closing remarks to give as much space as possible to further interventions from the floor. I have already one request from the floor. You might have noticed that there was no government in the panel. In fact, it's not a request. It's something that I have suggested the government of Thailand to do. Anita referred to a recommendation of when we went into what can government do. NAP is the first thing that Anita mentioned. We have all heard, I think, over and over in this forum that Thailand will be launching their first NAP very soon. And you probably also all know that one of the 4 priorities highlighted is indeed human rights defenders. So I wanted to ask perhaps Kun Narilak from the Ministry of Justice of Thailand to kick off the interventions from the floor and very briefly say a few words about the human rights defenders as they feature in the Thai NAP.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Royal Thai government, I'd like to share some government efforts in promoting and protecting the rights of human rights defender. Not only scope only for the NAP, but just touch on another general measure as well. As for the policy, we include human rights defender. We are aware of the fact that human rights defender may face some may face some risks in being violated. So we include the human rights defender into the National Action Plan on Human Rights first, and also we now going to include highlight the issue of human rights defender as one of the key priority issue under the NAP. So under the NAP, we will have a chapter on human rights defender, and it's comprised of the general situation on human rights defender in Thailand, the challenge, and also action plan to protect human rights defender. This is also include the plan of activities, time frame, and also the indicator and linkage with SDG and also the national strategy as well. And for the law, we try very much in amending the law to protect the human rights defender. Like we propose for amendment of the Criminal Procedure Code, enactment of Criminal Procedure Code Article Section 161/1 and Section 165/2 to given court discretion, open for more court discretion to consider the case filed against the human rights defender. To if that person is not file a case in a good intention, the court has the power to reject the case. And also we propose for amendment of Witness Protection Act, because normally Witness Protection Act will provide protection only for the witness in criminal case, but what we propose now is to extend the protection to everyone who are at risk of being violated. This is also including one of our main intention is to include cover the protection provided for human rights defender. And for another in practical level, we 4-5 years ago we set up the committee to develop the measure to protect human rights defender, and Kun Pranom also joined us in that committee. But unfortunately, it's not success yet. But our effort is still ongoing. So we will try very much in thinking about the appropriate measure to protect human rights defender. And I encourage everyone, if you have any good example in measure to protect human rights defender, please share with the government officer or me, or for the Thai government officer to think about the appropriate measure to protect human rights offender. But but recently we issue kind of we encourage all the Thai agencies to circulate the letter to make at least the government officer aware of the role of the human rights defender. So like Ministry of Interior, Royal Thai Army, Royal Thai Police, they circulate letter to their line officer to understand the role of the human rights defender. And also this year we provide training for human rights defender as well. And like I also joined the Human Rights Defender Summer School organized by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights every year. So to teach the human rights defender on how they can connect with the service from the government on an assistance and can request assistance from the government as well. And also like tomorrow I also join the training for human rights defender as well. And lastly, I like to highlight on the Conflict Management Act, which just enacted earlier this year. This is serve pillar 3 of the UNGP as well. So it's more like to provide remedy, and also it's kind of set up the state-based grievance mechanism and also community-based grievance mechanism as well, because this act will set up the central system for conflict management, where we will also set up the conflict management center in every district of the country, and also the community base as well. So I think this is a good one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kunaralak, for illustrating this bouquet of instruments that are in there, but to be open also for a further suggestion. I'll now open the floor. I see Roberto here. 1, 2. Let's start with these two. So first, Roberto Cadiz, then 1, 2, 3. Roberto, please introduce
Thank you very much, Livio. I'm Roberto from the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. My question is addressed to our distinguished speaker from Coca-Cola. I like your idea, that your practice, that you have created a department that deals on the issue of human rights. My question in that regard is, how high is that officer? Does it go all the way up to the board? Does it have enough power within the corporation to influence the behavior of the company? Because in my country, there are so-called human rights officers, but they're so low level that they're not even listened to, and they barely have enough staff to monitor their human rights compliance. My second question is, how global is this practice by Coke? Because in my country, the butler of Coke refuses to engage in significant collective bargaining agreement with its employees. Is that known to the highest officers, to the chairman of the board, to the president of Coke? So again, my question is, how high is your human rights officer, and how global is that practice? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberto, also for being very brief.
Thank you very much. My name is Pratik Srivastava. I'm a recent graduate from University of Cincinnati. So my question again is, first I'll give an example and then the question. So there are a lot of human rights defenders who face violence and human rights violations from communities or societies which have religion, ethnicity, and gender animosity deeply rooted into the very idea of it. And these issues are not just legal, they're beyond legal aspects and mostly to do with the mindset. So one very brief example I'd like to give is women in Kashmir and the community of half-widows. Half-widows are wives of men who are either detained or kidnapped or anything like that under certain charges. These women are facing challenges to literally live because there's a lot of religious expectations, gender expectations, communal expectations, such as you're not supposed to work or you're not supposed to do these things, or so that every woman now is a human rights defender, and this community is so small that there are not a lot of human rights NGOs or other NGOs working in the valleys in Kashmir. So my question, and the very situations in this community is very similar to the situations which the Thailand representative from International Protection mentioned. So my question to you actually is, how do you see these issues of religion, gender, communal and social expectations being mentioned or being addressed in policies and remedies when working for human rights defenders and protection for them? And does this act as a challenge to bring new policies or policy recommendations towards government? And mostly, how do you see the expectation? What are the expectations with these policies when these issues are present in the society and they're beyond the legal framework? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see another NHRI. It was the chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission of Nepal, I think, and then maybe there is also an MCD. They want to intervene. I see one here. Okay.
Thank you
let's try
for
to take
giving
at
me
least,
time.
1, 2, 3 more questions. Please,
I
chairperson.
will have some observation as well as some queries also. I would like to cite one example from Nepal. There was a big marble quarry which were permitted by the government. It was under the vicinity of Kathmandu itself. And the marble was one of the best which was quarried by the industrialists. It was pinkish marble which was sought after in Nepal as well in India also. But when quarrying the marble, it disturbed the flora and fauna of the mountain. Even the water table gone down, and there was environmental problem. So one lawyer, who was an environmental lawyer, he filed a petition in the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court, after hearing the case in detail, issued the order that the factory should be closed down. The question arose at the time that why the government has not assessed the environmental position of that factory and issued the license. But the industrialists paid some money to the villagers and they attacked the environmental lawyer, citing the example that they loses their jobs. This was one example. And Human Rights Commission itself a human rights defender. And sometimes we monitor the situation of some industrialist houses on the protection of the consumers' right. We found that they produced low standard goods, and we submit the report to the concerned ministry. So under our report, the ministry do acts. So we are also enemy of the big houses. And another human rights defenders are the journalists. They dig out the black business of the big houses, industrialist houses. So they are also attacked. My question is, how to protect human rights defenders? Because physically, Human Rights Commission can do nothing. Only they can issue the statement. Otherwise, they have to depend on the security forces of government itself. So my notion is that first, look at yourself. If you could protect yourself, then you can rescue others. So is there any such formulas which can be applied in this situation? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one last one. Sorry, I've seen the last one. I'm sorry.
Hi there. My name is Marion Ingrams, and I coordinate the OECD Watch Network. And my question for you relates to non-judicial grievance mechanisms, including in particular national contact points, which you were just mentioning. Anita, thank you so much for thinking about the different ways that governments can be involved in improving their own capacity with respect to human rights defender protections. You mentioned NAPs, policies like the one Canada has, new laws, education of judges, and I want to think about national contact points. OECD Watch has just put out research on what we see as a real dearth of activity, capacity, training for national contact points on how to handle this issue, despite the fact that 25% of cases filed by NGOs and communities have involved reprisals, and at least 20 20 national contact points have handled 1 or up to 13 cases involving reprisals. And so I'm trying to figure out what is it that stops NCPs from knowing what to do? And I think a lot of it is a lack of mandate from government. We're looking to government to make this a priority. And I think the NCPs are in a unique position, not only because they handle grievance mechanisms, because also their second mandate is to talk to businesses about their role. And I think that something that's missing here is for businesses to realize that the reason governments are engaging in repression of activists is to pave the way for their investment. And so they are at the root of this issue, and they need to tell the governments that they will not tolerate these types of repression happening to make way for their own activities. And I want to ask you, what role do you see for non-judicial grievance mechanisms? What do you think needs to change in how they're acting? And in particular, can you address the opportunity and tension that NCPs are in with an extraterritorial scope, that they have the ability to tell other governments that certain activities are unacceptable, and yet there's a political sensitivity in them taking that step. If you could address those, I'd be grateful.
Thank you very much. In 3 minutes each, I feel free to regroup the question or remind. In fact, some were posed directly to some of you. So the questions from Commissioner Roberto were directly posed to Shubha, so I'll ask her to respond to those questions, perhaps including also what companies can do to speak up more, so part of the last question. Then Anita, perhaps you can comment on NHRIs and NCPs. Is it true that NHRIs cannot do anything about it, or what should their mandate be changed to do more? Should the mandate of NCP be stronger? So I'll ask Anita to comment on state non-judicial remedies, and perhaps then Kumbi can comment on the question that was formulated in the form of issues that go beyond legal, so religion and gender, right? So maybe we start with Shubha first.
The structure of the Human Rights Department is that we have a global head who's a very senior functionary. He reports to one of the members of the leadership team of the Coca-Cola company. And then there are regional directors, people like me, who are reasonably senior. In the sense we put in more than about 20, between 20, 25 years. This whole, the way it is structured in Coca-Cola is that the ownership of this work rests with the business units involved. So we have several business units. We operate in 200 countries. And so we work with the leadership of the business unit. So it's a, it's not a junior person, one individual person, but the whole system, we have a cross-functional approach. So to answer the second question about the independent bottlers, our expectation of our independent, so they are company-owned facilities, company-owned bottling operations, and they are independent franchise-owned bottling operations. So our expectation of our independent bottlers is that they follow the same policies and the processes that we have as a company. Now, with respect to the specific bottler, I'm not, specifically aware of the issue concerned, but what I can guarantee to you is that, if you could give me your details, I'll make sure somebody from the global team specifically answers your question.
Thank you, Shubha. Anita?
Thank you, and I think the point, and the working group's guidance, of course, deals both with judicial and non-judicial remedy. So in terms of the issues raised by both the NHRI and I think, again, about the national contact point, we are trying to develop good practice and recommendations. I think the issue is that it's underexplored, and so I thank OECD Watch for raising this issue, and NHRIs are definitely defenders themselves. I think, again, the issue is that different NHRIs and different NCPs have different powers and different contexts, so we can't recommend one, but we can recommend some good practice. What I will say is one key is that we need guidance on reprisals. So to the extent that participating in a mechanism leads to reprisals against offenders, then there needs to be training and education and a policy. The Inter-American Development Bank recently came out with a toolkit relating to reprisals for defenders. That's one of the first, but hopefully it'll be not the last. So I think, again, this is key. But more than reprisals is the issue of prevention, right? So what does it mean if a complaint or an issue comes to an NHRI or a non-judicial, to an NCP that relates to harm to a defender? And there, I think the question is just how does that communication go back to the other government, right? So when it's a cross-border complaint, right, there are domestic complaints, and I think those are the most challenging, so in Nepal you mentioned. But when it's a cross-border complaint, I think one of the things we have to realize is that there's many ways in which states and companies will engage to stand up for defenders. Some of them will be public, but I think the other issue that our guidance recognizes is that some of that diplomacy will occur behind closed doors. I think for civil society, we have to somehow learn or to become comfortable with that it won't always be transparent. So an NCP should be transparent, but on certain measures relating to life and security, maybe the best answer is done in a different way. And others may disagree, but that's one of the things that we are learning in our discussions.
Thank you, Anita.
I think also the discussion have to shift it back into the issue of the state obligation when the state assisting business of human rights violation. It's a major problem. Before we have the binding treaties on business and human rights, we also have to look at how well states implemented recommendation of the other UN convention. Because we have many UN conventions, we good on the paper, and so many recommendations on the CEDAWs, on the ICCPR, on economic, social, cultural rights, on the UPR, which is all talking about human rights defenders. So all of that has to be go back to check how the state implementing those conventions and how the alignment linked to the issues of the business responsibility. I also want to draw attention of the good work of the Office of High Human Rights Commission Office in Bangkok. They run the Human Rights Defender School, like Minister of Justice mentioned. But also I think different various alignment of the UN agencies also have to maybe work a little bit more effectively together and close together to looking at what the issues are rising on that. I think the issues also who are so responsible for the harmful practice from the corporation. We talk about guiding principle, and I think it's what society is saying, guiding is not enough. We need the legally binding. Also, when the company and corporation are violating human rights, company might pay in different level, but their shareholders are not. So I like to advocate for us to looking at different ways to make the shareholders of the company to be solely pay for the compensation and responsible. Also including the ideas of the sole proprietor or the partnership of the company is also should make a liable, including criminal liable for the rights violation. We can't afford to get some of the civil compensation, that very little, and company can pay because you are rich. But if you can make the company liable, the shareholder liable for criminal liability, the killing, the enforced disappearance of human rights defender may be less. The issue of our friends from Kashmir and the women over there, I think it's a bigger issue, and the feminist movement in this region are also quite strong. But I think we are looking at in the regional level as well. The Office of the UN cannot operate in South Asia. So that is the human rights level at the regional office. But we are actually, again, looking back the safe space of the women to come together, and they'll be able to identify from their experiences what is the best way to solve the problem, including the issue of the fundamentalist. The other issues I want to end up with, I think the practical issues we are calling for you to support. As I said, it's a lot of women are very burdened on the family's responsibility. So we are advocating for the wages of the mothers, the issue of the welfare of the state, which is protecting the women who are not in the official formal labor market. Because all of these women are the ones who are actually fighting against human rights and facing repression every day. And I like to encourage everyone to act on the hope, not on our fears. Because that's where human rights defender women are standing every day with their hope. I can't end this without again making presentation. We were launching our friends Coalition of Human Rights and Development, but also Defender and Development were launching the report at the break in the afternoon on the report called Uncalculated Risk. Come to talk to us, and I think we can make more network to make effectively solution from people from the ground themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumbi. I'm glad we can continue this discussion at your session, and thanks very much. I'm afraid we're out of time, so I will not be concluding or summarizing. I have taken extensive note. I have actually 12 recommendations. So if I'm ever given the chance, perhaps next year, and the honor to facilitate again a session on human rights defenders, I think we can make a good case, perhaps next year, to to be a plenary session, I will start with those points and review what of what suggested today was already accomplished or is underway. So before we go, join me in giving a big, big round of applause. Not to the panelists for sure, but I suggest let's give a big round of applause to all the human rights defenders around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Livio, and thank you, panel. This has been very inspirational. And we have now to rush for the side events or lunch break. So we're back in this plenary at 2 p.m. The ones attending the side events will start at 1 p.m. And if you are an NHI, you have a special lunch with Professor Surya Deva. My colleague Leah on the back, please wave, Leah, will please come to her and she will help guiding you to the UNDP offices where the lunch will take place. Okay, so come back to the parallel sessions at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Okay, thank you.